Now, everyone is waiting with bated breath for a vaccine that could spell the end of all these restrictive measures. There are several undergoing phase 1 and 2 human trials. Now, how real is the belief that a vaccine would spell the end of our worries? Ethan, as a doctor, what's your take on vaccines and the COVID-19 measures we now have?
I will speak as a doctor as well as an epidemiologist. In our battle against the virus, I would say that if you can have effective, safe vaccine, it will be the best public health intervention strategies that we can put together for mass prevention. But I would say that the journey of having the vaccines become commercially available or widely available for the entire populations to use is still some way away ahead of us. I would also say that at this point in time, the science and the latest technology has helped a lot in terms of the speed that we see in terms of the vaccine development. So certainly we hope that we will see that an effective and safe vaccine will hit the ground very soon. But at the same time, I just want to emphasize again that it will take some time before we see that happen. And in the interim, we have to utilize all the measures that we are familiar with. We know that it works today, and continue that till one day we truly can have an effective vaccines that we can use.
All this rush to get a vaccine to come out, does that come with dangers? Would the final product be sufficiently good? And more importantly, would it be safe? David, you're also an ID doctor. Could you give me your take on that?
Well, first of all, we're not sure that a vaccine can be developed. We know that other coronaviruses cause immunity, but that immunity is short-lived. Sometimes you can develop a cold with a coronavirus and then 6 months later have a cold with that same coronavirus. So we don't exactly understand the immune response for this coronavirus at present. And hopefully we'll learn that as vaccine research goes on. There are over 100 different efforts to develop a vaccine and many different ways of developing that vaccine. But we shouldn't put all our eggs in one basket. There are also other areas of research. And those areas are looking at the protection that might be offered from antibodies that are produced in survivors, that are in monoclonal antibodies produced in laboratories, and antiviral drugs. So we have other areas of research also that are very important that could impact on the outbreak. But what's most important is to use the tools we have now and make sure that we do the best we can, not waiting for that vaccine, which might not come, or that drug, just getting on with it, living with this virus, and seeing how the virus acts over time. Because remember, we really don't know the destiny of this virus.
Right, so you're saying that a vaccine may not be the answer and we may not be able to get a vaccine. But all the other things that you mentioned are treatments, which means people do get sick, but they may not die of it. But that means a lot of people may need hospital care and they will flood the healthcare system.
That's right. That's a major risk in that they'll need it. But the idea would be to diagnose early and treat early so people don't have to go to the hospital system. And that's a strategy that would be worked out if there is, in fact, a drug or an antibody preparation that's been shown to be able to modify the disease and to prevent it from becoming serious. So early diagnosis and treatment is very important. And that's why the system that Singapore has of identifying early and isolating people who are either contacts and infected or the patients themselves is very important.
Well, actually, you seem to be in a minority right now, because according to most of the news internationally, everybody seems to be going for a vaccine. There are a few drug companies that have pulled out, and they probably think like you do, that it may not be possible to actually develop a good vaccine. But as you mentioned, there are at the moment more than 100 vaccine candidates. If we are lucky, there may be one vaccine that becomes viable. But if that should happen, the question then is, will there be enough for everyone? And who will decide who gets the vaccine? Will it be a matter of who can pay gets it, or will it go to people who need it most? David, you've been with WHO for quite a number of years. Do you see WHO playing a role in vaccine dissemination?
Well, I would hope so. I think WHO has to make sure that there's an equitable distribution of vaccine. And as you know, during the influenza scare with avian influenza, there was actually a framework set up that would include providing vaccine to developing countries, and industry has agreed voluntarily to save 10% of their production to provide to developing countries in some instances. So that's a framework that's been developed for influenza. We'll need to see how we can move ahead with a vaccine once there is, if there is a vaccine, once there is a vaccine, how that can be more equitably distributed. And it's also important to know which populations would be vaccinated. Is the strategy to vaccinate the whole population, or to vaccinate only those populations at greatest risk, which are those with comorbidities and those also of people who are elderly? So a lot to be learned between now and the time when a vaccine is available, if one does become available. And in addition, production capacity is important also, because we can't remove vaccines like measles vaccine or other vaccines from the assembly line, from the fill and finish line, and substitute a new vaccine without having difficulties in those diseases as well. So it's a real complex issue, and WHO must be at the center of solving this.
Right. So if they ramp up the production of a COVID-19 vaccine, then some other vaccines may have to give way to that, and that is not necessarily a good thing. What about the flu vaccine? There are a lot of companies that do that. Would they be able to put aside the flu vaccine for a year and then concentrate on the COVID-19 vaccine? What are the negative impact of something like that?
Well, the flu vaccine will be very important the next flu season in both the northern and southern hemispheres, because that will protect people against the flu and make it easier to diagnose other respiratory infections. If indeed this coronavirus exists or continues, then it would make it easier to diagnose this, because there would be fewer patients presenting with respiratory disease. So flu vaccine is crucial to continue using and increase its use in those risk populations, hospital workers and the elderly, to be sure that if they do become sick, that it's easier to diagnose what's causing it, and if it's coronavirus, they can be isolated properly.